to the conference committee report, I would like to remind members of the House that the debate on this question should center on the conference committee report, not the bill itself. If the conference committee report passes, or how we can deal with that on the next order of business. But this debate at this time should be only on the conference committee report. The House has before it on the seventh order of business the conference committee report on House Bill 1283. Mr. Chief Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, your conference committee, including Representatives D. Johnson, Schreiber, Beck, and Kelch, and Senators Flacco, Scheibel, and Marcellet, recommends the Senate recede from the Senate amendments as printed on House Journal pages 1106 and 1107, adopt amendments as follows, and place House Bill 1283 on the seventh order. Mr. Speaker.
Representative D. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. These are the changes, once again, to House Bill 1283. So in addition to adopting the Hog House from the Senate that was sent back to conference, the bill is further amended to include clear language stating that a parent may opt out of any state test or assessment required under Section 15.1-2108 of Century Code. The Senate Hog House was further amended to explain that a school district is not required to provide instruction or activities to a child who is not testing during the time a test is administered. Lastly, the conference committee adopted an additional amendment to the Senate version requiring school districts to report on information about parental directives. As a reminder, the rest of the Senate version was kept intact. The Senate version removes the section allowing parents to withhold a child from school during the time the test is administered and requiring schools to treat a student as in attendance when the student's parent has opted out of a test. In addition, an emergency clause was removed from the bill. The bill, as House passed it, included a provision in various sections of Century Code mandating that school districts inform parents of their rights to opt their children out of the tests associated with that particular section. The Senate instead placed the requirements in a single section listing the tests that may not be opted out of. Additionally, the Senate clarified the manner in which a parental directive is to be given to the school districts and the manner in which a school district must post the parental directives form. Finally, the Senate included an expiration date so that we may discuss the issue again in upcoming legislative action. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, I ask we concur with the Senate amendments as I've explained them here.
Is there any discussion? Representative Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the bill carrier yield to a question?
Representative Johnson, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Representative Schatz.
Representative Johnson, this is basically the Senate's version of a House bill, and you've accepted that version. Were there any House amendments offered to you that could have supported the House's position while also offering some compromise with the Senate?
Mr. Speaker and Representative Schatz, none of our CON-free members had amendments that were moved forward.
Mr. Speaker, may I continue?
You may continue.
Okay, well, it looks like to me we, rejected what we did last time because we just agreed with the Senate, and so I don't see why we would want to vote for this again.
Is there further discussion? Representative B. Koppelman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. This seems like a deja vu from a few days ago because what's in front of us is nearly the same thing. What they did in conference committee was there were some amendments given to our conferees that were not proposed again, and what they did accept was the Senate's version with additional Senate items. If you look on the last section of the bill, you'll find that they added some reporting that school districts had to do to DPI. They added the number of opt-outs, amount of money potentially lost, and I believe those things came from the Department of Public Instruction. So they added what the Department of Public Instruction's interests were on the bill, as well as the Senate's interests to make sure that parents could never opt out of certain things. And they put in there on the very first subsection of Section 1 that they can opt out of 15.1-21-08, which is one of the 4 tests that were on the original bill. However, they've also sunsetted this after 2 years. And so subsection 2 is the biggest problem of the bill. I believe the amendments that were given to the conferees would have allowed the Senate to have some of their descript ways of doing it, which would have been in subsection 3 and subsection 4. It would have honored the intent of the original bill by not having subsection 2 and still having subsection 1. It would have narrowed the scope so that it did not include the ACT, which I know caused some heartburn in the Senate. And it would not have had an expiration date, but then again, it would not have had an emergency clause, which we had in our bill. So it would have been a compromise. It wasn't proposed, and I would hope we could defeat the report and send them back again. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Nathy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. Members, I hope we would accept the conference report, move it to the 11th order, vote it up or down, and be done with this issue. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Casper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. It's interesting that the House passed our version a number of weeks ago. The Senate sort of turned that version around. We get it back to the conference committee, and our conferees are not attempting to put the House version back in the bill, but going along with the Senate amendments, and I don't think that's right. I think this body ought to reject these amendments and get some new conferees that will put amendments on that more reflect the sense of the House, and go back to the conference committee and try to protect our position. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the questions on the motion of Representative Johnson to adopt the conference committee report, the Speaker will call for a verification vote on this. Key will be opened. If you vote green, you accept the conference committee report. If you vote red, you reject the conference committee report. The key will be open. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Key will be closed. Clerk will take the record. The final vote shows 51 in favor of accepting the conference committee report, 39 against, 4 absent, not voting. The conference committee, House Bill 1283 is declared passed. The House will go on the 11th order of business, and the House has before it House Bill 1283, which has been read. Mr. Chief Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, engrossed House Bill 1283 was conference committee amendments introduced by Representatives B. Compliment and other House and Senate sponsors. Engrossed House Bill 1283 is a bill for an act to create and enact a new section to Chapter 15.1-21 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to parental directives and to provide for an expiration date. Mr. Speaker.
Representative D. Johnson.
Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, as stated earlier, the bill contains clear language stating that parents may direct school districts to not administer state assessments to their children. The bill also takes the parental directive provisions that were in the original bill and places them in a single chapter of the Century Code. Section 1, subsection 2 lists clear exceptions where a parent may opt out their students out of a required test. These exceptions include any test required by the school district to complete any grade K through 12, any test required by the district to graduate, for example, a recently passed civics test, the ACT, and the Work Keys assessment. The ACT and Work Keys are tests that are currently mandated by law. Section 3 of the bill establishes that a parental directive is only valid if presented to the school district on a form developed by the Department of Public Instruction. Furthermore, the bill makes clear that a parental directive is only valid for 1 school year and expires at the end of the school year in which it was received by the school district. The bill also requires that the form be made available to the parents on the school district's website. House Bill 1283 further states that a school district is not liable for any consequences a student may face as a result of a parental directive not to take an assessment. Again, the language of the bill also states that a school district is not required to provide instruction or activities for a student that has been opted out of a state assessment during the time the assessment was administered. Last, the bill now includes a study requiring school districts to report To DPI, the number of parental directives received, the number of parental directives applicable to students who are economically disadvantaged or those from major racial and ethnic groups, those with disability, and those with limited English proficiency, and any loss of funding stemming from the parental directives. Assembly members, this bill strikes a workable balance between parental rights and local school district protections. The requirements mandated by this bill not only give the parents an option when it comes to state assessment, but they also protected the schools from consequences that may arise from the parental directives. This bill provides the school district's guidance by requiring DPI to establish a form to be used throughout the state. Furthermore, the bill clearly lays out which assessments may be avoided by parents and which assessments may not. The bill is necessary to avoid any confusion among the districts regarding the opt-out procedures, and it gives administrators a clear directive moving forward. Similarly, parents will have a definitive procedure to follow in the event they decide to exercise their directive rights. Finally, the bill provides much-needed uniformity which still protects the rights of the parents accordingly, and I ask that this House give this bill a final green vote.
Is there any discussion? Representative Strinden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the bill carrier yield to a question?
Representative Johnson, would you yield to a question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Strinden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Johnson, just to make sure I'm reading this right and in accordance with something we passed earlier this session, because the bill requires a student to take all of the tests required for high school graduation, they would be required to take the civics test that we passed, correct?
Mr. Speaker and Representative Strinden, that is correct.
Is there any further discussion? Representative B. Koppelman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Assembly, I'm going to ask you to, as we say in the business, shoot my dog. I'm going to ask you to kill my bill. And because I would rather have this bill die than achieve the opposite of its intent. You heard from the previous speaker that it was a balance between parental rights and school districts, and I don't see that. I see many line items of perceived school district protections and things for them to shield parental directives without a lot of representation for what has long-standing been a tradition of parental directives in their kids' education. You might note that it says that any test or exam that's required for completion of grade may not be opted out of. Some of you may know somebody who objected to certain parts of the sex ed curriculum. And in the past, school districts have been very good about allowing parents to work around things that they find offensive in that curriculum. There have been other circumstances where there have been concerns, whether it be religious or other reasons, where parents have worked with school districts to come up with solutions. This says, thou shalt not opt out of those things, ever. And so a bill that simply dealt with 4 directives that the state had, 4 parts of statute that the state had told school districts to administer, but that had been silent about whether or not parents had to subject their kids to that. Now 3 of those are taken out. 1 says you can opt out if you jump through 27 hoops. And then everything else in all the directives parents can give would be gone. All those rights would be gone. And so that's the reason why this bill has to die. And it's too bad that we turned a bill in that was about parental rights and made it about school district restrictions. So I hope you'll join me in voting red. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration House Bill 1283. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Representative Kempenek? Does any member wish to change their vote? Key will be closed. The clerk will take the record. Final vote shows 7 yea, 83 nay, 4 absent, not voting. House Bill 1283 is declared failed.